Crania aegyptica. His research found that the Egyptians were in fact Negroid, but not Negroes. The Negro skulls were slightly longer than the Egyptian skulls, but upon studying the skulls found of the servant class in Egypt, he found the Negroes in America to be exact matches. Now this is the full quote from the book Black Image in the White Mind, page 75. Morton pointed out that both cranial and archaeological evidence showed that the Egyptians were not Negroes, as abolitionists and colonialists had maintained. Now let me read that first part again. Morton pointed out that both cranial and archaeological evidence showed that the Egyptians were not Negroes. Morton pointed out that both cranial and archaeological evidence showed that the Egyptians were not Negroes, as abolitionists and colonialists had maintained. And in fact, blacks have been regulated to the same servile position in ancient Egypt as in modern America. Now, why did Morton say that both abolitionists and colonialists connected the slavery of the Negro in America to Egypt? Now, when anyone thinks slavery and Egypt, the images that come to mind are usually connected to one time and one event: the Exodus. The story of the oppression and bondage and redemption of Moses and the children of Israel under the heavy hand of Pharaoh Thutmose and the ancient Egyptians. Morton makes the claim that abolitionists and colonialists claim that the blacks were Egyptians. Yet his studies of skeletal remains, mummy heads, and tomb inscriptions, proved by Egyptologist George R. Giddin, prove that blacks in America had a connection to Egypt, but were not Egyptians, but rather slaves and servants in ancient Egypt.
Because no one has looked for evidence of the Exodus in this period, the tomb has never been linked to the biblical story. And yet, there is a perfectly preserved wall painting here that records an ancient migration into Egypt from the area of modern Israel. As in the Bible, the scene involves bearded Semites riding donkeys and bringing their families and flocks into Egypt. Like the biblical Israelites, they are wearing multicolored tunics. The hieroglyphic inscription on this wall calls these people the Amo, God's people.
The interesting thing is, there's no writings from abolitionists or colonialists connecting blacks in America to Egyptian descent. But there are endless writers, historians, abolitionists, and slaves alike who connected blacks in America with the Hebrew people. For instance, Harriet Tubman is the most widely recognized symbol of the Underground Railroad. When she escaped on September 17, 1849, Tubman said freedom felt empty unless she could share it with people she loved. So she resolved to go back and rescue friends and family. Harriet was nicknamed Moses by abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. The name was used as an analogy to the biblical story of Moses, who attempted to lead the Hebrews to the promised land and freedom from slavery. The very connection Morton cites in his quote. And then there's others, like James W. Hagee, professor of history at the College of Charleston. In this article, Muslims, slaves, abducted Moors, African Jews, misnamed Turks, and Asiatic Greek ladies, some examples of non-European religions and ethnic diversity in South Carolina. Whew. Man, say that 10 times fast. Anyway, here's the quote. In 1786, two men appeared in Charleston, dressed in the Moorish habit, and aroused a great deal of suspicion by their strange ways. Therefore, an officer of the law began to try to question them. The Moors, he found, did not know English and resented the suspicious lawman. According to an officer, the men became impatient and vulgar, and as a result, the lawman gave one of the fellows a little bit of manual correction by the way of reforming his manners. By this time, a mob had gathered, and the authorities feared a riot might break out. Finally, they determined that the two were of the Jewish nation. Say it one more time. Finally, they determined that the two were of the Jewish nation. They took the two men to the home of a woman on East Bay Street who understood their language. She found that the two had sailed from Algeria to Virginia, where they had been arrested upon suspicion of them being Algerines. They had then traveled overland to South Carolina. Hagee continues in his article to highlight what he classifies as African Jews in South Carolina. Quote, another Jew from Africa was Billy Simmons, a black slave, according to Simmons, who was owned by the editor of the Charleston Daily Courier. He was born in Madagascar and lived in the Barbary States, and arrived in South Carolina when he was quite young. He may in fact have arrived with his relatives and with Star Barrett, who could have converted him. He, however, insisted that he belonged to a tribe of Israelites known as Rechabites, mentioned in Jeremiah 35. His Jewishness cannot be questioned because of two of the Hazanim, or cantors, of the congregation Bet Elohim in the 1830s wrote about him and attested to his devotion. Dr. Julius Ekman reported in the Weekly Gleaner, January 16, 1837, on his exemplary devotion on Yom Kippur. And Maurice Mayer described Simmons in an 1859 German magazine as the most observant of those who go to the synagogue. Furthermore, he was an accomplished scholar in Hebrew and Arabic. When he died, his obituary appeared on the front page of Daily Courier, December 12, 1859. Seeing that I'm a South Carolina native, when I first came across information of this ilk, it struck a particular chord with me. Growing up as a kid in SC, we would take that 3-hour trek from the upstate to the coast. Walking downtown Charleston through the streets of the slave market, that's now a tourist attraction.
This stela is what the Egyptians would have called a triumph stela, a victory stela, commemorating victory over foreign peoples.
Most of the hieroglyphic inscription celebrates Merneptah's triumph over Libya, his enemy to the west. But almost as an afterthought, he mentions his conquest of people to the east in just 2 lines.
The text reads, Ashkelon has been brought captive, Gezer has been taken captive, Yanoam in the North Jordan Valley has been seized, Israel has been shorn, its seed no longer exists.
History proves the Pharaoh's confident boast to be wrong. Rather than marking their annihilation, Merneptah's stela announces the entrance onto the world stage of a people named Israel.
This is priceless evidence for the presence of an ethnical group called Israel in the central highlands of southern Canaan.
The well-established Egyptian chronology gives the date as 1208 BC. Merneptah's stela is powerful evidence that a people called the Israelites are living in Canaan, what today includes Israel and Palestine, over 3,000 years ago.
We've been searching to find the evidence that Egypt recognized the existence of the ancient people of Israel living in the land of Canaan. Finally, right in front of us is the very thing we have been looking for. The Merneptah stela contains irrefutable evidence that 3,200 years ago, the people of Israel were living in Canaan as a distinct people group. And this here is the smoking gun, and at the bottom here it says Israel is no more. Now the original is in the Egyptian Museum, This is a copy. The reason this is so important is because this dates to 1200 BC. Now the Bible says at that point that the people of Israel are in their land, but here we have in Egyptian history the mention of the people of Israel. The great superpower of Egypt has to mention Israel, and also shows us that there is an unreliability about Egyptian history, because it says Israel, its seed is no more. In other words, I've wiped out Israel. They're all dead, they're all gone. Of course we know that's not true. This is amazing. This is the smoking gun that we've been looking for. This is it. This is a smoking gun. We've seen it. 1200 BC. The people of Israel are definitely in the land. The Bible is correct, just as we read it. Absolutely amazing. Look how huge this one is as well. Absolutely beautiful. And we're linking the Bible with Egyptian history, and they just went like that. It's perfect. It's brilliant. This is a day I'm going to remember forever as well. Pharaoh Merneptah claimed that he destroyed the people of Israel, but actually this Pharaoh left us with the evidence which decimated the weak and foolish theories of skeptical scholars who once claimed that no such people ever existed during this age.
And the first reference to Israel in Egyptian hieroglyphics, just incredible, 3,200 years ago. Yeah, it's pretty spectacular.